All questions will be saved until after the panelists have spoken. Specify to which presenter you would like your question directed, just so our moderator can be sure to pose it to the correct presenter. And also, please send in your questions as we go instead of waiting until the end. At the conclusion of today's presentation, you'll receive a webinar evaluation via email. We encourage you to provide feedback so we can continually improve the SSP and Scholarly Kitchen webinar programs. You will also receive a link via email to the recorded broadcast of this webinar and to the slides. I'll now turn it over to David Crotty to get our webinar underway. David?
All right, thanks. Let's see, get into presentation mode here. There we go. So welcome everybody. First I want to start us off with make sure we're all on the same page here. So the question is, what do we mean by preprint? On your screen you see a couple of early definitions, but basically we're talking about circulating an early draft of a paper before it's submitted to a journal for formal review. And this is really something that's gone on for as long as journals have existed. You write a paper, you send a copy to a friend or a colleague, and you ask them what they think about it. The difference that we're seeing now is that we're now in a digital realm, and we're starting to see a much more systematic and much more public distribution of these early drafts of a paper. If you saw the news in March, you'd have found out that a small group of biomedical scientists have rebelled and gone rogue, doing something totally unheard of, and this came as a bit of a surprise to researchers in fields where the use of preprints has long been. To be clear, the formalized use of preprints can be traced back at least as far as 1922. In the mid-1960s, for example, the NIH ran the information exchange groups that circulated more than 1.5 million preprints. The National Bureau of Economic Research Working Papers Archive goes back to 1973. Archive has been in existence for the physics community since 1991, with the biology subject area since 2003. And in the humanities, the Social Sciences Research Network was founded in 1994, and the REPEC, Research Papers in Economics, was launched in 1997. But really what we've seen in this past year has been driven by a group called ASAP Bio, As Soon as Possible Bio, which is a scientist-driven initiative to promote the productive use of preprints in the life sciences. It's been put together by several prominent scientists, particularly Ron Vale from UCSF, as well as Nobel Prize winner and former National Cancer Institute Director Harold Varmus. And they've enlisted support from the NIH, the Wellcome Trust, the Howard Hughes Medical Institution, the Moore Foundation, other funders as well, and they've garnered a lot of attention. And their goal is to drive the use of preprints in the biomedical world, where use has lagged much of the rest of the research community. So bringing biomedicine into the picture raises some new questions, which I'm hoping we'll talk about in a bit. But what I really want to do with our discussion today is get a sense of where things stand, how researchers are using preprints, where their use fits into the scholarly communications landscape, and what an increased reliance on preprints means for journals. So today we have 3 panelists joining us. Each brings a different perspective on preprints. Richard Sever is here from BioArchive, a leading preprint service for the life sciences. Darla Henderson will talk about ChemArchive, which is a new preprint effort from the American Chemical Society. And Greg Gordon from SSRN will give us the view both from the social sciences and the humanities, and also from a preprint service that's been around for more than 20 years. So what we're going to do is start with a hopefully brief informational presentation from each speaker, and then the bulk of the webinar is going to be a panel discussion. So I do invite everyone to please send in any questions you may have for the panel. So Jennifer, if you can send things over to Richard, he can start his talk.
Thanks, David. So can everybody see my screen now?
Looks good.
That looks good. Okay, great. Well, so just as background, I think it's important to make clear that BioArchive is an initiative of Cold Spring Harbor Lab. Cold Spring Harbor Lab is a research institute on the North Shore of Long Island with 600 staff, 50 research groups in molecular biology, cancer, genomics, and neuroscience. But as well as doing research, we also have a communication program which includes conferences. We've been running meetings for almost 100 years. We have the Banbury Center, which is a sort of think tank center for small, very focused meetings. We also have a conference center in China. We have a strong teaching program that includes the graduate school, Watson School for Biological Sciences, as well as residential courses, and the DNA Learning Center, which promotes education in molecular biology and genetics amongst high school students. And Cold Spring Harbor Press, which is our books and journal program. And so really, BioArchive was an extension of this, part of the lab's scientific mission to disseminate knowledge. It's a non-profit service, and submission and access to all the content is free. The benefits are pretty obvious. Our major motivation was to speed up the transmission of results in biology, and also provide a venue for scientists to get feedback on their papers prior to submission to a journal. And I think this is particularly important for early career scientists, where the cycle time of careers is kind of incompatible with the publication cycle. And by being able to post preprints, these young investigators are able to make their recent work available to grant and hiring committees long before the published paper, which may come much later. And this graph just shows that very starkly. If you look at the blue curve, it shows that the median time among journals in PubMed, listed in PubMed, is about 7 months from submission to publication. And of course, that's one journal, and many people go through more than one. By contrast, the distribution of BioArchive preprint is something like 24 to 48 hours maximum. Just a quick run through the BioArchive features. Every manuscript is date stamped, given a DOI, indexed in Google Scholar. The author gets to choose if it's new, confirmatory, or contradictory results. The latter two categories providing an opportunity for dissemination of work on reproducibility. There's a variety of subject categories, a choice of licenses that the author can adopt. We provide article metrics, commenting, and links to the published version. This is just a few screenshots of the site, so you can see this is the listing of the papers, and the subject area is highlighted. If you look at an individual paper, you'll see the DOI and PDF download link. The history tab shows that earlier versions of papers, all versions are retained as effective versioning, metrics, article usage, and all metrics provided by altmetrics.com. And on this example, you can see below the abstract where we provide a link to the published version when it appears. Prior to that, there's a link saying that this is a preprint, which goes to a page that explains to a novice viewer what a preprint is. So 3 years on, we've had around 7,000 submissions. 30% of these have been revised, many more than once, around 30,000 authors in total. And if you look back a couple of years, you'll see that more than 60% of the papers end up being published in a journal, and more than 400 journals have now published papers that first appeared as preprints on BioArchive. I think we would say progress over this time has indicated that there has been a behavioral change among biologists. There are more biologists posting and reading preprints, and certainly in areas that never considered this beforehand. On the journal side, I would say certainly in basic biology, it's now the exception rather than the rule for journals to consider a preprint prior publication. That's rarer and rarer. And among funders, I mean, certainly the NIH now have changed the BioSketch to allow scientists to cite preprints. There's some debate about exactly how and where, but I think that's definitely progress. This curve just shows the sort of hockey stick we're seeing, as I said, around 7,000 in total, and the number at about 450 per month as of October. The breakdown by subject category illustrates the predominant number. Most of the papers coming from evolutionary biology, genomics, genetics, bioinformatics, but I'd caution on making any assumptions about that long term. I think that's just the early adopters. Certainly if you look at physics, Archive started very much in high energy physics, but before long all the other disciplines were well represented, and I suspect we'll see the same in biology. Just a few measures of impact. We're beginning to see citation of BioArchive preprints in journals. We're getting about a million article views per month. We hear that there's a lot of private feedback to authors via email. Obviously, we can't quantify that. As for commenting, we've seen moderate commenting, 11%, which may seem low until you compare it to journals, where it's much, much higher. There's some authors are getting feedback on blog sites, and there's a lot of social media commentary around, more than 100,000 mentions on Twitter. This slide just shows the licensing choices made by the authors. There's a strong representation of CC BY, which you might expect among early adopters. But I think significantly the majority of authors are choosing a more restricted license. And this may be because they feel with what is essentially unfinished and unfinalized and uncertified work that they want to retain more control over it. But there may be other reasons. We've integrated with journals so that you can submit directly to more than 50 journals directly from BioArchive now with what we call B2J technology. That's proving extremely popular amongst authors, and anybody who's listening who's interested should contact me about that. We also have J2B, where a number of journals allow somebody to simultaneously post on BioArchive when submitting to the journal, and again, we're expanding that. I think this all paint a picture of BioArchive as a kind of an essential hub, a publisher-neutral service that allows people to distribute work and then send it on to journals for certification. It allows work relevant to meetings to be discussed, people to discuss new work on blogs, and also providing a venue for reproducibility by allowing posting of confirmatory and contradictory results, which are a class of article that traditionally were not looked at so much by journals. So I think that's, I'll leave it there and let the next speaker go on. I think that's where we stand right now.
Thank you, and this is Darla Henderson. Just a moment while I get the slideshow up. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today about the ACS's decision to launch ChemArchive, a preprint server designed for the chemistry community. So in early August of this year, the ACS announced our intention to organize and launch ChemArchive to promote the sharing of early research results amongst chemists. In our announcement, we were very clear that we were seeking collaborators, fellow scientific societies, funders, other partners to join our efforts. And our announcement focused a lot on our organization and the desire to organize and launch this initiative. In our efforts, we received quite a bit of media coverage, and I would say primarily very positive feedback from all around the globe, from chemists and from other experts as well. So today I wanted to share with those of you joining some of the key questions that we answered around our early considerations before this announcement, around the value of a preprint server and what's the value of a chemistry-specific preprint server, as well as an ACS-organized preprint server. This was particularly important for ACS to go through. As mentioned earlier, many parts of scientific communities have not yet embraced preprints, and chemists have historically taken a somewhat skeptical view of preprints, resulting in many journals, including some of ACS's own journals, being hesitant to embrace preprints as submissions to their journals. So we really had a lot of consideration and thought to put into this process. And we did a lot of what you heard Richard talk about. What's the value of a preprint server? Both what we know a preprint server can bring today or potentially could bring to the communication of scientific results tomorrow. And I'm going to focus on a few here. I think the first goal listed is the broader feedback than afforded by traditional peer review. And if that helps to increase the scientific rigor prior to or concurrent with peer review, it's absolutely a goal that we as a scientific society would like to embrace. We also know that posting preprints facilitates new connections, and that it seems that sometimes those connections can be broader and more diverse. thus improving collaboration and also advancing scientific research. Additionally, we were well aware of the decrease in time to posting and sharing. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes, specifically as it relates to chemistry, which is historically a very fast turnaround from submission to online publication. So also, we wanted to look at what's happening in our community. And of course, archive had been around 25+ years. And we were well aware of the uptake of archive and its success in the physics community and related areas. We also looked at whether chemists were publishing within archive, and there's not a lot of posting going on in archive by traditional chemists. Those of the physical chemistry area, of course, were more likely to do so. And then we have been monitoring what's happening with Richard's group with BioArchive and the embracing that the life scientists seem to be having for a preprint service. Chemistry is often called the central science, bridging various traditional disciplines, and in our view, this left a gap, an opportunity for a chemistry preprint server. So taking all of those things together, we wanted to look at, well, what's the value of a chemistry-specific preprint server, right? There's archive, there's BioArchive, there are other servers. Is there an advantage to a chemistry-specific preprint server? And definitely all of the values listed on the previous slides. But of course, scientific communities have different needs. And this is why scientists already self-group around different subject-specific societies, both for their meetings, for their networking, and for communication of results through journals and other methods. Then there's the common adage, like attracts like. Scientists are more likely to participate, particularly in new initiatives, if they see their colleagues doing so, if it's subject-specific. And so we felt there was a real advantage to having a chemistry preprint server in those two regards. With the time to publication or posting, ACS journals specifically, and chemistry journals in general, have really fast times to publication when you look at an individual journal. So many ACS journals have first submission to publication times of 1 to 2 months, so 4 to 8 weeks. However, preprints still bring value, time-saving value to chemists in this environment because authors don't always, and arguably in most cases they don't, submit first to the journal that they eventually publish in. So even though one specific journal is really fast, and ACS feels that our journals are very fast, the overall process and timeline for when any one author can still be very frustrating and lengthy. So looking then about ACS and our role, why ACS? Why a collaborative chemistry preprint server? ACS is the world's largest scientific society. We have more than 157,000 members around the globe, and we are a nonprofit society. Our publications division and chemical abstract services combine to provide one of the world's leading sources of authoritative scientific information. We know that because we are a large and established society, we have a very large number of different established community-driven processes for gathering information, for determining how to launch a product that meets the needs of society. So we can leverage those to effect a successful preprint server. And we have a reputation of meeting the community's needs. We also have this built-in infrastructure within the large organization. We have local divisions, national and global meetings and conferences and divisions. But we also have subject-specific technical divisions, and we felt there was an opportunity to leverage that focus to help better understand and meet specific needs in different parts of the chemistry community. And I've listed here the ACS vision and mission, and really we're about improving people's lives through the transforming power of chemistry. But when that comes down to a specific goal for us, our first goal is to be the most authoritative, comprehensive, and indispensable provider of chemistry-related information and knowledge-based solutions. So not only are we the right fit to help lead and organize this effort, we believe that in the current environment where preprints are now more widely embraced by subject areas close to chemistry, that we can better meet our own goals more comprehensively with a preprint server. And we do believe that ChemArchive will provide a more comprehensive and transparent cycle of communication for chemists. If you think about a scientist, and particularly our own chemists, they come to a conference, and that's often the first place they publicly share their results, either through a presentation or a poster. They may have tweeted about it. Some of them do. They certainly will have talked with their own colleagues and presented within their own universities or corporations. But then a preprint as a secondary solution to that before the published article really helps, we believe, complete this cycle of communication. And then for us, I wanted to share with you what we consider to be our keys to success. But first, organizing a preprint server is different than launching a new journal, a new product, or even launching a preprint server on your own. So organizing for us really involves the first two keys here. It's about community engagement. And we began our outreach prior to our announcement in August, but we certainly have intensified our outreach to different aspects of the community, technical divisions, and leaders in the community to gather feedback, address issues, and define better how a preprint server can meet a chemistry community's needs. And partnerships. So ultimately, we believe that the most sustainable path to a successful preprint server will be a collaborative global effort. And our announcement in August really was positioned to allow us to go out and more broadly reach out to fellow societies and other interested partners. So we have non-disclosure agreements signed now and discussions well underway to look to form those partnerships, as well as what our governance structure might look like for such a community-driven product. We've been reviewing those needs, and as we go drafting product requirements, like all good product requirements, the more feedback you get, the more tweaking you might be doing. So we expect those to evolve some over the next few months. And we've been exploring all of the variety of platform options to determine the best fit for chemistry, and that includes both proprietary and open source solutions. The last point is also really key for us. We have been heavily engaged in discussing with ACS journal editors and editorial teams who each set a policy regarding preprints for their journals. What ChemArchive means, but what preprints mean. Many of our communities had not really had a reason to consider preprints. No one had ever come to their journal and said, I want to submit to your journal, and now I've submitted this preprint. So a big part of what we've been doing is education. And as a result of these discussions, the portfolio has flipped such that now more than 2/3 of our journals are already compatible with preprint servers. The remaining journals are continuing to meet with their editorial teams to ask for information from ACS and improve their understanding so they can make the best decision for serving their communities. And ultimately, we believe to have a successful, sustainable chemistry preprint server that engages broadly community feedback and development and partners, that will be positioned to launch ChemArchive sometime in the summer of 2017. I'd like also to point out that my email is on this particular slide, and I welcome your feedback.
Thanks everybody for attending this webinar. I'm going to there we go. What I'm going to do is not try to duplicate what Richard and Darla have already gone through. They've given just a really wonderful overview of preprints and how they work and why are the reasons to do them, and we've got hopefully plenty of time for some Q&A. But what I wanted to try to do is maybe just connect a few dots. There's a lot of things going on in and around preprints, a lot of discussion, and hopefully give you a few nuggets that will spark some discussion during the Q&A. Excuse me. I just keep not wanting to. There we go. So I gave a talk last week at the Charleston conference called Wind of Change, and what we talked about there was kind of this evolution of scholarly communications. And I showed a picture of this man who probably is not familiar to anybody, but he's actually Harold Macmillan. And he was a British Prime Minister in 1960 that gave the speech that's kind of coined the phrase Wind of Change. And he did it after traveling around a lot of the countries in Africa and realizing that their independence was just going to happen. And so when I think about preprints, there's an analogy here that I think that is just going to happen. We're starting to have a lot more content being produced, a lot more sharing happening, and a lot more people wanting to just take advantage of the speed of preprints. Now that's not to say that there isn't value in peer review and all the other things that we've been doing. I think there's tremendous value. But there's a lot more content being produced and a lot more need for other outlets. And many of the outlets that Richard and Darla are creating have very specific needs, or are meeting the very specific needs of their discipline. SSRN is much broader, and we can talk about that a little bit later, but there's real information sharing going on at a very early stage, and I think that's just great, but it is just happening, so it's not really surprising, although the rogue biologist headline did make me smile. So in case you don't know SSRN, we're the largest repository for social science and humanities research. We're starting to touch on many areas outside of the social sciences, but that's really pretty much where we got our start. And I think the most important thing on this particular slide is the last point. We really try to level the playing field. It doesn't matter if you're at Monroe Community College here in Rochester, New York, or Harvard, or Stanford, or LSE, or any school in the world. Basically, your research stands on its own. It comes into SSRN, it gets shared in SSRN, and most importantly, hopefully it gets used by other scholars, other researchers to help create cool, new, innovative research faster. And that's really what we try to do, is help researchers create new research. The third bullet here about we don't take a copyright to anything. The author in SSRN is in control. They have the material, they revise the material, they share the material, they take it up, put it down whenever they want, but they're in control of the content. And I think that's a significant benefit of many of the preprint servers that are occurring nowadays. At SSRN, we want to have 1,000 flowers bloom. So as I said, it doesn't matter where you are or where you're affiliated. It's really about sharing ideas. Similar to what Richard was saying, you put something up and within minutes or hours it's available to the world. So you get that early stage research being shared, the research evolves over time, and more of that research gets shared across different places where quite honestly they have very limited access to information, and that's another important benefit of these repositories. I show this slide often because it really kind of changes and it sets the stage for some of the things that we've been talking about so far, and we'll talk about more later. So what you see here is the daily analysis of new submissions, the blue dots, and revisions, the red dots. And so as you can tell, in the fall of 2007, we modified our technology and our servers to allow revisions to occur. And what you see on the right side is that in April of 2012, the slide ends. And the reason the slide ends is that one of those days, you can barely see it, but one of those days on the right side of the chart is that the red dot actually exceeds the blue dot. And so that's kind of a cornerstone for us in when actually the SSRN eLibrary became truly a living, breathing corpus of information. So last year we had something around 70,000 submissions, and we had about 50,000 revisions. So it's this ongoing, evolving, living, breathing research database. So the idea comes in, it gets evolved through collaboration, it gets evolved through feedback. A lot of authors put up a paper saying, hey, it's early, I want your information, I want your feedback. If you're working on similar areas, let's work together. Let's figure out how to move this idea forward, not necessarily by myself, but maybe possibly together. One of the things we do at SSRN is we allow everybody to submit for free and download for free. And usually what I like to follow that up with is free, as in a puppy. And anybody who has children who has had a puppy brought home that was quote-unquote free, you know that free actually has a cost. So as everybody on this call understands, that there are real costs to providing free services. And so those free services somehow need to be paid for. And as I say, free is in a puppy. Now, free also means that we want to help them, as I said earlier, create innovative research faster. So my simple definition of innovation is to create something new by being exposed to a broader, deeper set of existing things. And that's really what we've tried to have SSRN be, the broadest, deepest set of existing things. Again, to help researchers create cool, new, innovative research faster. We want them to be able to access information and ideas earlier so that they can build upon them and keep moving the research forward. I wrote a piece of paper, an article actually for Against the Grain. You can download and read it at your leisure. But basically I started to look early on at the differences between the scientific, technical, medical field, and social science and humanities, and started to see more sharing going on in the SS&H space than in the STM. And I'm very happy that over the last few years, especially based on the stuff that Richard and Darla are doing, we're starting to see more of the STM space to share. More people in the life and hard sciences are starting to put their research out there, sharing it earlier, understanding the benefits of sharing, and understanding that sharing actually can be helpful. I'm very pleased to see the number of journals that now accept something that's been posted to a preprint repository, preprint server, to actually then go ahead and publish it, because again, I do think there's real value in that process. One of the things that often gets kind of melded into the preprint conversation is open access. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about open access, and what you see here is kind of this chronology of how I believe that open access has happened over time, the commercialization and some of the problems that publishers brought to the table, and this kind of evangelical rise in open access and more sharing wanting to be happening in many different places. So when I started to think about it, I started to think about the evolution of scholarly publishing and this rise of open access. You know, thinking about how it affects publishers and how it affects scholarly publishing in general. And so, you know, I remember being at the Charleston conference and people talking about digitization and people talking about that putting publishers out of business, and open access and that putting publishers out of business, and preprint servers now putting publishers out of business. But what I really think is that there's a little bit something else happening. And I think that we've evolved scholarly publishing now to the point where it's this thing is, I crudely refer to it as the YouTubification of research. A lot more people creating a lot more research, and a lot of that research needing a place to go earlier. So you've got Open Notebook, you've got Open Bench, you've got preprint servers, you've got disciplinary repositories. But you just have a lot more people creating research and really focused on enhancing the content and moving that research forward as quickly as possible. So my last slide here is when I think about preprints, you know, I just think that we're maybe looking at things a little bit differently. So this is a page from Katie Shelley's book, Picture Cook, and it's a lasagna recipe. And so anybody who's ever used a recipe, you know, you either think that way and the recipe makes sense because you follow along and you can kind of visualize it, or recipes just the way they're laid out just are terrible. They just don't work for you. And so here's a book that just changes the user interface for a recipe. And so when I think about preprint servers and when I think about the stuff that we're trying to do, maybe what we're just doing is changing the interface of how research gets done, and that to me is pretty exciting. So thanks for your time, and I think we're going to move into questions.
All right. Thanks to all of our speakers. The first thing that occurs to me, you know, listening to the three of you coming from different fields with different practices, is this idea that preprints have been around for a long time, particularly in the physical sciences, the social sciences. And it's interesting here, Darla mentioned, you know, this sort of skeptical view from chemistry, and Greg talked about this idea of the sharing practices in the social sciences being different than in other fields. So, you know, my question is, you know, I started thinking, well, why did preprints take so long to spread to where they have now, to the life sciences, to chemistry? You know, my immediate thought was, oh, well, social scientists aren't patenting their results, you know, into products, but then I realized, well, actually physics, there's a whole lot of patent-driven research there as well. So that's not a clear answer. So I wanted to put it to the panel. Why has it taken so long in some of these fields, and what has changed in recent years that has made them more receptive to the use of preprints?
This is Darla. I'll start by saying I think in general we have a community that's becoming more aware of what it means to be open, open access, open data, open source software. I think that has been a big driver. I know within ACS our own open access programs have really been focused a lot on education and providing opportunity to participate in open initiatives. And I think that makes scientists a little more willing to think about that kind of sharing economy. And then the second, of course, is digitization and the availability of information online, and the feeling of frustration that, but I'm ready now, even if I haven't gone through peer review, I'm okay to share this with the world, which is simply just a different attitude and social and cultural change.
I would just add, I think that certainly in biology, I think a couple of things have happened. There's been an influx of computational scientists and physicists into biology, many of whom are familiar with sharing of preprints on archive. So I think that has happened. And these people and existing biologists are working more computationally. And so suddenly the obviousness of this approach has become apparent. So I think it's a combination of those two things, and just the notion that sharing and sharing fast now has real benefits. And so I often say that altruism is great, but what can motivate it can be it's even better if there's something in it for you as well. And I think that's the advantage. If early sharing like this, there's a a real utility for people. So I think that contributes.
I think just a couple, two basic points. I think that in that piece that I wrote for Against the Grain, I said that STM versus SSNH, and I think that in the STM space, I'll talk about archive specifically in a moment, but in the STM space, it's traditionally been more like a rifle shot. It's a single bullet. What's the cause of this or the cure for that? And in the social sciences, it's been more like a shotgun blast, observing the pellet spray, and trying to learn from that observation. And in the STM space, traditionally, there's been a lot of money tied up in labs. And so the journals would if you breathed about something, Cell or Science or Nature, wouldn't think of publishing it. So you kept these ideas really close to the chest so that you got the funding to fund your lab. And in the social sciences, it was more about sharing because most of the top scholars made actually more money consulting and writing and expert witnessing and all of those kind of things than they did in their faculty positions. So it was about getting their reputation built. The exception to this, everybody comes back and says, well, what about physics? Well, physics is a pretty unique field. Most of the people who are top scientists in that space, and especially high energy physics, where archive got started, have been through CERN, been through SLAC, been through Fermilab, so you actually know who's pretty good researcher. So you don't necessarily have the same value proposition for peer review and for journals in those spaces because you probably shared a bench with many of the top scholars. So you can make different types of judgments. So I think physics is a little bit of a unique animal in this space because of that sort of community relationships.
And so the move into biology and chemistry and particularly the medical world raises some new questions, and these are the first couple of questions that came in from the attendees today. The first question is, can each of you just sort of talk about how you vet the actual material? Richard said 90% of what comes in. Can you talk about what that 10% that you cut out is? And then the bigger picture question. Is it okay to put out sort of unvetted, unrefereed, unreviewed material? Are there differences that we have to observe when we're starting to get into clinical research, patient care, things that may directly influence policy? Do we start drawing lines on different types of research? So first, the easy question, how do you vet what comes in? And second, what do we, how can we be protective that we're not putting out a bunch of garbage that may cause problems?
So the way we do it at BioArchive is that we have a two-stage screen process, so that everything that comes in is looked at by, it goes through a plagiarism screen, and then it's looked at in-house to see if it resembles a scientific paper. If it does, then it moves into a pool where a group of affiliates, much like archive moderators, look at the papers, and they're charged. They're all active scientists, and they're basically charged with flagging anything that they think is non-science or nonsense. So basically, that's what the 10% is. That there's odd kind of crazy creationist theories. There's things where somebody has an undergrad essay and they want to put that up, or there's something that really isn't a paper. It's pretty obvious. And I talked with Paul Ginsberg and some of the folks at Archive, and most academics can make an assessment within about sort of 30 seconds as to whether a paper you know, a genuine academic paper. I mean, it may be the worst paper you've ever seen, but it's still a paper. So that's our criteria for the screening criteria. That's for the bulk of papers. For things that come in the clinical trials category and the epidemiology, they have an additional flag that they must raise, which is anything that, if disseminated as a preprint, could potentially be a harm to public health. So what we're talking about there is things like if somebody put up a paper saying, for example, measles vaccination causes autism, then we wouldn't post that. Or, you know, heterosexual sex is not a risk for HIV transmission, something like that. And we have had instances where we get back to the authors and we say, this is not a comment on the validity of the paper, but we think that in this case, these findings should only be disseminated once they've been reviewed. So we're taking that quite carefully. On a more general point, the one thing I would say is, I mean, when we decided to move into the more clinical area with these baby steps, I had a conversation with a bunch of MDs, and what was kind of interesting there was the consensus was basically, you know, we're worried about putting clinical misinformation on BioArchive, and the consensus was, somebody actually said to me, you know, have you looked at the internet? Essentially indicating that the clinical misinformation on the internet and the snake oil selling that's going on kind of really dwarfs anything that could happen on BioArchive. So I think there is, you know, one needs to have a sense of perspective. I think also one needs to be very clear that this hasn't been peer reviewed, and so when we did that, we made it very clear that these things haven't been peer reviewed, and for anybody who encounters the site and doesn't understand that, there is a link saying, what does this mean, and an explanation of what peer review is. So I think that's the kind of sort of checks and balances that we have for now. You know, having a course filter, but making people well aware of this. And this, I think this goes on to some of the discussions about citations and issues like that. I mean, I think that just like in a journal, you shouldn't assume just because something is cited that means it's correct.
At SSRN, we have three stages. The first one is a review for completeness. You know, is the metadata, is the right thing uploaded, is the right PDF attached, are the right authors there, and is it really something that is in the scientific discourse? So we have a team of people who've been here for a while, and they review every single thing that comes into the system, and they check and just make sure that it is part of the scientific discourse. You know, over the years, as SSRN's gotten more popular, you can imagine some of the quasi-non-scholarly stuff that we've received. Some of it's quite funny and some of it's quite scary, but yes, we're weeding that out. The second stage for us is classification, so we try to make sure that the things are properly classified. So we've got about 36 early stage professors, PhD candidates, and people like that who have broad knowledge and can help us find the best home for the content. So at SSRN, we want to make sure that everybody gets this cross-pollination, not just of disciplines, but also of perspectives. So the accountants can see the way that the legal scholars think about the same type of issues. And this cross-pollination perspectives, we think, helps move it forward. And finally, we have a review at the dissemination stage by you know, thought leaders and noted scholars in the 1,000+ areas that we cover. And then we also have research at all stages of its evolution. So we may have that 8 to 10 page idea paper. We have thousands and thousands of peer-reviewed papers, some freely available, some available on a pay-per-view basis, but we have this what we call a reference ID field. So right on the abstract page, we tell you whether that's been published somewhere, whether it's a working paper series at university, whether it's from a conference, wherever it is. So it kind of gives you a flavor for, you know, where this particular paper is in its evolution.
When can I ask both you and Richard? I know both of you, when the paper does get published in a journal, is that an automated function, or is that sort of a responsibility of the author to make that clear?
So it's an automated function. At BioArchive, we have scripts that identify these and make matches, and we alert the author so that we don't have false positives. And actually, it's interesting that we've been doing this for quite a long time, but it's now a condition of assignment of preprint category DOI by Crossref that we make every effort to rapidly make that link.
At SSRN, it's the responsibility of the author. We don't have an automated function to be able to do that.
Okay. Darla, anything on this subject of vetting before we move on?
Sure. I was just going to add that we plan to vet in a very similar manner with an in-house scientist looking at the content to ensure it's complete, that it's scientific discourse, and there's nothing touchy that we should be aware of, both in terms of medical or national security issues or the like. And then we would also add to that a plagiarism check and include on the article a notice that it's not peer-reviewed, similarly to our colleagues at BioArchive.
So I guess my other sort of really big picture question is where do preprints fit into the scholarly communication landscape? Greg, used that phrase, everything that comes along is all about putting publishers out of business. What are preprints compatible? Are they complementary? Are they an existential threat to journals? How do preprints work with journals, or are they eventually meant to replace them?
Well, we work with I think it's about 17 or 1,800 journals. So I think that this this boogeyman, this evil being in the closet makes wonderful conversation, but I just don't see it really happening. I think there's a real value add to the publication process. I think there's a real value add to peer review. As Richard said, there's certain things that just have to go through that process to make sure that it's as close to correct and right as possible. I think that some of the statistics I've seen, that 90% of all scientists that ever lived are alive today, just means that there's a lot more people creating a lot more research, and I think that we can do a really good job of sharing that content. Half of the papers that are actually posted to SSRN are never published. It may just be an idea paper that can be the catalyst for 3 or 4 or 5 other papers. It doesn't have to go through that whole process, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that whole process needs to go away for preprint servers to be successful. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for all of us to be working together like we've done for the last 20 years.
I think I would echo that. I think what I always say is that preprints decouple the distribution from the certification of work, and the latter takes time and it takes money, and I think that's not going to go away. There are all these other services that that journals perform, and I think many of them will continue to be needed. So I don't think it's an existential threat. I think it's an existential threat if you stand still. I think this does mean that that journals need to adapt and really provide evidence that they do more than just disseminate research. But I think I think anybody who's involved with any good journal would argue that they do far more than that. It's much like newspapers. They've had to adapt. They're not the places that break the news now. So I think that, I suspect that's another question you were going to get to at some point, David, so I won't kind of steal your thunder there. But I don't think they are. I think there's always going to be a need for sort of selection, markup, all these types of things. I think the form of it may change a little bit, but I suspect the things that end up doing it will resemble journals, and journals will evolve to be those things.
I relate also with what Richard said about decoupling the reveal from certification. And certainly if you think about the world that we're operating in, where communication is so facile and in so many aspects of our lives, social media, email, the international travel that occurs today by researchers, that reveal has already been happening at conference presentations, through those communications. And this is just another way to make the reveal more broadly visible. But the certification and the significant value that peer review brings in my opinion, stays. And having a final version of record you can point to as a definitive work is always going to bring value.
Yeah, let's pick up on that point. So, we have this tradition called the Inglefinger rule that basically journals are not going to publish anything that has been previously published, and that when we work with the media and the newspapers, they want everything to be embargoed, so the journal gets to make this big splashy announcement and get a lot of attention, or the New York Times publishes it before just as the paper is coming out. So given that we do have this world of social media, if you go to a meeting, as soon as someone says something or puts up a slide or says something in a poster, a picture of that slide is out on Twitter to the world. Is the Inglefinger rule an archaic concept? Is that something we as certainly the journal should let go of at this point?
I would say yes. I think that whatever you think of the rationale for, I had an interesting conversation with Matthew Herper from Ford's about the journalist perspective. One of the reasons that it was argued this was a good thing was so that journalists could all have embargoed press releases and not release them to a certain time to allow them to write well-informed commentary. And I made the point to him that once that goes, that just makes science reporting just like all other reporting. Nobody holds up news of an earthquake because everybody wants to kind of have an informed view of the earthquake presented in the New York Times at the same time as it's disseminated by, a geology society or something like that. So I think it goes, and it's one of those things that once you accept that somebody can tweet at a meeting about a paper, somebody can email somebody, it just seems like it's so obvious that ship has sailed that trying to preserve it is, it seems futile to me.
Yeah, I think Richard's point is a great one. About that it is just going away, and it makes it more like all other reporting. I follow with interest kind of the long form writing styles and blogs and things like that, and I think that's what it's going to evolve to, right? Is that you're going to have people who are not taking the time to write the piece up front, but there's going to be the people who actually have taken the time to interpret and contextualize the piece. That will then provide a different type of a service, a different type of a reading experience for people who are interested in that. So I think it will evolve. That's just one of the costs of being able to share quickly, and hopefully the benefits are to be able to get more research done faster and improve research overall. But that is definitely one of the costs, is that form will change.
Okay, I want to squeeze in a couple of sort of practical questions before we run out of time. One question is archiving. Do your services do archiving with locks, clocks, Portico, things like that for the long-term preservation?
We will do so. ACS uses Portico.
Yeah, that's in our plan. We're in the process of implementing that. There's some debate as to who wants to do what, but we're in the process of implementing that. It's I think it's certainly something that you want to have, if only to reassure others. I think archiving is critical, and just like you'd archive a journal, you want to archive a preprint.
And Richard and Darla, offline we can have a chat about this, because we've visited this question many times, and most of the standard services have a very difficult time providing archiving services for repositories like ours because of the fluidity and the ongoing changes in the content. But we can have that conversation offline. What SSRN's chosen to do is we actually work with universities around the world, Stanford, Chicago, Korea, and ECGI in Europe, to actually have a full copy of our paper repository, so that we have multiple sites that actually have that. It will be around if something ever happens to SSRN.
Yeah, that's
some of the questions. Oh, yeah, go ahead. Some of the other questions have come in around citation and altmetrics and things like that. You have multiple versions of this paper in multiple places. I guess you have different DOIs between the preprint and the published version. Are there ways to reconcile the citation record of a paper, if it gets cited a certain amount of times as a preprint and then starts getting cited as a paper, Can those numbers be, are those combined? Are they put together? How are we connecting the preprint with the published paper?
So I think that will evolve. So Google Scholar already does this. If you look at Google Scholar and somebody has cited your BioArchive preprint and then cited it once it appears in Nature, and you look once Google has indexed both, the things will be unified and the citation counts will be summed. So I think that's an algorithm that's doing that, and it's Google's ability to match those things. The fact that now the preprint DOI, this obligation that cross-reference is rightly placed on us to communicate to them the journal DOI for a preprint DOI means that you will have the preprint DOI and the journal DOI will be connected at the level of their own metadata in the DOI registration record, and so I think that should allow all number of people to merge those counts and slice them and dice them. So I think we're not there yet. Other Google are there, but I think others will get there, and I don't think there's a big obstacle going forward, except for the odd false negative and false positive.
This is a very, very complex area, and Google does a lot of things right, and some of the more fine-grained areas in this they do poorly, in my opinion. SSRN, we basically put together a version group. And so that's, it could be the conference version, could be the working paper version, could be the published version, and a post-publication version. And then we basically identify any one of them that has been cited, and then we have a sum for the entire group, because citations are not easily, it's not really easy on a broad scale to identify which version is actually being cited due to a whole bunch of reasons.
All right. Go ahead, Darla. Sorry.
I'm going to add that because we're now allowed to assign DOIs to preprints, I think that will help clean up some of the issues that SSRN and Archive have faced with tracking the citations on the different versions, and hopefully will provide a better solution.
Just for the record, SSRN's been issuing DOIs for anything that comes into SSRN's repository, not from a publisher, for 10 or 12 years now. So we actually have been issuing DOIs for a very, very long time. We had an ISSN assigned to the repository along with Wood's whole oceanographic and the IMF many, many years ago. So we've been assigning DOIs for a long time. It's a matter of whether people actually use DOIs and references that creates the problem.
Right. I think we're getting better in using these persistent identifiers for automating a lot of these processes. Let me wrap up with one final question. There's several people have asked the sort of follow the money questions. How are these paid for? Who pays for preprint servers? Who pays for, are authors supposed to pay? Are institutions paying? How are these things going to survive in the long term?
Well, at ACS, our plans are to develop partnerships with other societies and partners so that this is a global community effort as well as funding agencies. We don't intend to charge authors for the service or for the.
Yeah, and I would say the answer is similar from BioArchive. I think our view is that this would be a philanthropic service. We don't intend to charge authors or readers. I think one thing that makes that easier is the fact that we all, any publisher will know that if you look at APCs for open access journals and article costs for subscription journals, that you're talking about thousands of dollars per article in costs. For a preprint, 2 orders of magnitude less. So, the kinds of sums that you have to find per paper are small, and we've always felt that means that it would be easy to support this from non-profit foundations, etc.
Very quickly, SSRN has used a freemium model, so we've always been and always will be submit for free, download for free, and we've wrapped premium services around that, and they basically fall into an alert service and alert services, and then kind of a back office SSRN where we provide repository services for hundreds of schools and universities around the world. So that model has worked well for us and for a very long time.
All right. Thanks, everybody. I know I learned a lot today. Let me turn things back over to Tim to wrap things up for us.
Thank you, David. And thank you, Richard, Darla, and Greg, for a great conversation about new developments in preprints and also what we can expect to see in the future in terms of impact and future development. As Greg said, preprints are changing the interface of how research gets done. And you've given us a lot to think about. I echo David that definitely learned a lot today. And thank you all for attending. Once again, please do take the time to respond to the webinar evaluation you'll receive via email. Your feedback will help us continue the webinar programs for 2017. This does wrap up the SSP and Scholarly Kitchen webinars for 2016. We plan to announce the 2017 schedule sometime in December, so watch this space. And with that, we are concluded. Enjoy the rest of your day.